Hello, everybody. Welcome to another discussion for the ATARC Quantum Speaker Series. We are excited today to hear from Joe Kofa. He is a VP of Tech Transition at Leidos and a lecturer of quantum computation at Johns Hopkins. He's here today to talk about the latest workshop and report from Quantum Economic Development Consortium that talked about quantum and AI. As always, we'll be doing Q&A at the end. So folks who are attending, please click the Q&A button at the bottom and we'll try and get to it at the end. Thank you, Joe, for being here. We're excited to hear from you. Over to you.
All right, my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Allison. Yeah, excited to be here today. Wanted to summarize the quantum computing and artificial intelligence use cases that was recently published by the QEDC. I think in order to talk about the paper properly, just a few quick notes on terminology up front. There are some acronyms. Just want to be a little bit clear. Sometimes the term QC and AI, so QC plus AI, may pop up. When I say that, I'm really just talking about, in the general sense, the combined usage of AI and quantum technology together. And that differs slightly from AI for QC, which is where we take artificial intelligence and use it to further the development of quantum technologies. And then the third classification is hybrid QC and AI. And this really refers to using quantum algorithms in conjunction with classical machine learning models to form a better hybrid model. Okay, so that's QC and AI. This is a very general term. AI for QC is exactly as it sounds. And then hybrid QC and AI is machine learning focused both on the quantum side and the AI side. So in reading this paper, they really focus a lot on the commercial impacts of the growth of AI. They talk a lot about how it's driven a lot of transformation across different use cases and also across different industries. I've seen this myself at Leidos in the form of how we deliver IT services internally to the company. Right? Our software developers are equipped with tools that allow them to write code more efficiently and generate tests more quickly and follow software development best practices. And just in general, I think there's a consensus understanding that we just all as employees feel more productive in general with the tools that are available to us here. I would say that in addition to some of the commercial aspects, one aspect of AI that's been really important to my life and impactful personally, my wife and I are foster parents, and we received our first placement about 2 years ago. And the young man whom we did not know, he was a non-English speaker. So we only spoke Spanish. And we were very fortunate to have a number of Google Homes and sets of ear pods that could do live natural language processing to provide that translation layer so that we could effectively communicate. So AI is everywhere. It's in our personal lives. It's certainly in the commercial spaces. And right behind it is quantum computing. And more generally, I would say quantum technologies in general. Compared to AI, right, QC is not as far developed. It's a little bit immature in terms of its technology. But I think the combination, the intersection of quantum technology and artificial intelligence, right, it's showing a lot of promise. We think we're going to be able to solve a lot more challenges that we can't currently solve on classical computers. So it's really exciting to explore the juncture where quantum technologies intersect with AI. So just a little bit about quantum technology and its evolution. It's been rapid, though it seems like it's been a long time, right? Back in the 1900s, early 1900s, physicists were still understanding some of the quantum mechanical principles that underlie quantum computation today. But it wasn't until the early to mid 1980s where we came up with this formalism for what it actually means to compute using quantum particles. So about 1982. In 1994, right, theorists were actually developing really impactful algorithms that demonstrated that quantum computers would have a well-defined advantage over classical computers. And this even went so far in Shor's algorithm to show that he can factor large prime numbers, which is really alarming to those of us who work in cybersecurity because we're really fearful of the fact that that's going to have on current day cryptography. So now we're in an era called NISQ. We're in the noisy intermediate scale quantum computing era. So a lot of progress is being made. There's a lot of hardware vendors in the industry who are working to produce scalable, fault-tolerant quantum computers. And then when these suitably large quantum computers exist, there's going to be a number of use cases that we'll be able to address with them. So from here on out, I'm just going to go through some of the use cases at a high level, do a technical deep dive into one specific area, applying AI to develop a better quantum sensor. And then at the end, I'll just add a little bit of narrative about my thoughts on the quantum computing state as it stands currently, and kind of where I see the merger of QC and AI going in the future. So when a suitably large quantum computer exists, which in my opinion is still years away, there's a lot of interesting use cases that this technology is going to enable for us. And one of those is chemical and material sciences. So basically applying quantum computing to chemistry. And in 1982, when Richard Feynman wrote his paper defining what a quantum computer was, this was exactly the purpose that he had in mind. Right? He lamented the fact that the classical computers couldn't simulate quantum particles just by nature of their physical variations. You can't represent something that's quantum using something that's classical. So you can't represent an electron using a basketball, for example. And so one of the applications that we're looking at for chemistry and material science is, can we model molecular interactions more quickly and at larger scale with the intention of doing things like developing new materials? So the Navy is looking at this to prevent biofouling, right? The accumulation of algae and other contaminants on the hull of a ship that actually cause drag in the water. They're looking at quantum models to defeat biofouling. A lot of pharmaceutical companies are investing in quantum computing solutions. The idea being that they can more rapidly come up with new compounds and molecular structures that will lead to new drug breakthroughs and treatments. And then many car manufacturers and electronics manufacturers in general are looking at how this technology can be used to optimize batteries. How can they store power better for longer? A really interesting class of problems that really AI has not yet completely tackled, these are really hard problems because of their scale and their complexity, is something called combinatorial optimization. And combinatorial optimization comes into play in a number of different use cases. One that comes to my mind is how you do intelligent routing if you are the new Spirit Airlines CEO or you work at Southwest and you want to minimize the number of gallons of fuel, but maximize the number of passengers that you're able to exchange between a series of geographic points. That's a really big problem. There are lots of nodes in that network, but it's further complicated because it's a very high dimensionality problem. You may want to factor things in like consumer willingness to pay a certain price versus the price of gas versus air resistance and other things. Another one is just supply chain in general. The thing that comes to mind for me here, I know Amazon has developed some proprietary algorithm for how they deliver goods to your home. And so what they want to do is deliver the most amount of packages, but they want to minimize the number of time that it takes, and they want to minimize the number of hours drivers are spending driving, while minimizing fuel and battery energy costs. So certainly quantum computers, a specific one called an adiabatic quantum computer, really looks promising for solving these types of challenges. I think the third one I'll talk about is something called quantum sensing. So this is a quantum technology. It's based on quantum particles like quantum computers are, but it's a little bit different than computing. The goal here is not to take a qubit and perform some form of computation with it. But in quantum sensing, what we're ultimately after is we're looking at these subatomic particles, and they're really sensitive, extremely sensitive to their surrounding environments. And so the question becomes, can we create better sensors? Can we create a better thermometer? Can we create a better gravitometer or magnetometer? And can we measure things more precisely and more accurately using a quantum bit rather than classical particles with the way things are done today? So quantum sensing, it's extraordinarily interesting. There's lots of applications for it. The one that I wanted to talk about is something, a particular technical use case is something called an NV center. So an NV center is a specific type of qubit. It's a nitrogen vacancy center. And these NV centers are found actually in nature. If you were lucky enough to pull a diamond out of the ground and that diamond had a slight pinkish hue to it, right? That red photoluminescence that comes through that diamond, that's actually caused by one of these types of qubits existing in nature. So NV centers are very interesting. They have a number of properties. They are a quantum system, so it's a two-level system, and a number of properties that make them really desirable in some ways, but also very challenging to work with in other ways. And in particular, NV centers are really, really good at sensing magnetic fields. Very useful. And my other favorite thing about them, I guess there are two, is one, they have directionality. So not only can they sense the magnitude or the strength of the magnetic field, they can also detect the direction. And if you can detect magnetic field and you can detect direction on the surface of the Earth, well, suddenly you're looking at a sensor that might help you navigate the globe based on the magnetic gradient anywhere on the Earth without having to communicate up through a satellite, where we have to do that with a technology like GPS. So these magnetic sensors can serve as a denied access GPS device. And maybe my favorite thing about them is they operate at room temperature. So a lot of the qubits that exist today, they have to be super cold, near absolute zero, to minimize their interactions with the external environment. But I think these are very, very interesting in that they're optically controlled. So we will shoot laser beams at them, which I'll talk about in a second. But they can exist basically in a lab environment, right here on my table or on your desk at home. So the way we work with an NV center, right, it does operate at room temperature. So we'll shine a green light on the NV center, and we'll initialize it to some basic low-level energy state. And then we'll put it inside of a magnetic field. Then what we'll do is we will use a microwave generator, and we'll send microwave signals at that NV center. And when we get on resonant frequency with the magnetic field, something interesting happens. It emits a different color light. So we shoot our green laser, we get the right frequency for measuring our magnetic field, and red light will be emitted. And if we measure that red light, then that light is actually proportional to the strength of the magnetic field. So if we can get that optical readout and read that red light, we can roughly say how strong the magnetic field is, which is great. But there's a problem here. It's just not as simple as shine green light, measure red light. We would like for it to be, but again, the reason that these quantum sensors are so sensitive to their environment, like the reason that they're such great sensors, in other words, is the same reason that they're difficult to use for a sensor, because they'll take other inputs, the strain in the physical diamond, if there are any electric fields around, if it's super hot, right? If there's a really high temperature in the room, all of those things are going to affect the readout from that NV center diamond. So some researchers actually set out to fix this problem. Right? There's a number of things called pulse sequences, where you can fire the laser at a particular frequency at this diamond that will help it maintain its quantum state for longer than it otherwise would. And it will minimize some of those disruptive impacts of those external forces in the environment. And so people set out to figure out what these pulse sequences should look like. And in the 80s, when this research was done, it was a very manual process. People would literally sit in the lab and say, I'm going to fire a pi pulse and a 2 pi pulse, and I'm going to go back and forth and see what that results in. And they were just manually trying different combinations of laser pulses to see if they could get their qubit to be any more sensitive. So a research team from the University of Maryland under Ron Walsworth, who's a huge magnetometry expert, they turned to AI to actually solve this problem. And this is where we're talking about finally AI for quantum sensing. And so what they did initially was they took, there's an AI algorithm called evolutionary ML. And evolutionary algorithms, you basically set up the quantum state, you set a parameter, so it's kind of like a success threshold in a sense. And any qubits that meet that success threshold, they'll move on to the next generation and essentially sort of procreate with each other. They'll share the best attributes that made them good sensors, and they'll try to create even better qubits that make better sensors. And so they were trying to iterate in this way and say, okay, how do I get the best possible sensor out of this system of NV centers? Well, unfortunately, it wasn't the right AI approach. The state space simply grew too large and could not search it in a time that was tractable. So these Research experiments went on for days and days and days, and they still wouldn't even finish. So then they changed their approach, but they said, we're still going to use AI. We really think AI can help us come up with novel pulse sequences. So that approach then changed from evolutionary algorithms to something called a recurrent neural network, or a QNet. And so they took the quantum state, they fed it into a neural network, and then the neural network would evolve based on something called a Hamiltonian. It just governs how this quantum state evolves in time. And they would look at the results, and they would define a reward function. And if those results were going closer to maximizing the reward function, they would send that back through as input to the next step. And if it was going further away from the state that they hoped to achieve, they would discard that result and try a new quantum configuration. They continued to do this and continued to do this, and they kind of refined the approach. And at the end, they came up with a new pulse sequence. This took place over a period of, I'd say, about 3 months' time, about 3 or 4 months of active research. And they came up with a new pulse sequence that was as effective at isolating that qubit as the researchers came up with back in the 80s, after years and years of research and manual trial and error. So I think a really great takeaway here was when you merge the power of AI, right, it can intelligently search through a pretty large state space, not a gigantic one, but we can learn things faster that are going to aid the development of technologies that are existing today. And that's a really interesting example of that. And so from an economic development perspective, the company took this technology, and the company is called Hyperfine. And Hyperfine took these NV centers, they're magnetometers, so you can basically do an MRI with them if you wanted to. And they put these NV centers into a portable magnetic resonance imaging machine. And they can take this machine out to patients who can't come in where the MRI is inaccessible to them. They're either afraid to be in the MRI, or they just simply can't travel. They may be bedridden, but they still need healthcare. And so these MRI machines can actually be taken out to meet the patients. They scan their brains in the way that you would expect using MRI. And then the machine automatically applies AI. It applies image recognition algorithms to the results of the scan, and pretty much within minutes of your scan being done, or excuse me, within seconds of the scan having been completed, it can produce a result to a doctor and say, this scan looks clean, there are lesions on the brain here and here, you may want to look at these more closely or take additional triage steps. So just really interesting to see how AI was used to make a better sensor. The sensor was used to make healthcare more accessible. And then once those scans were done at those people's homes, they applied AI to the imaging result again to be able to more quickly produce a report on the patient's health. It was so really interesting to me. And then outside of the use case, I mentioned I just wanted to provide some of my own perceptions of the QC market, so quantum computing, and maybe share with you additionally where I think things are going with the merger of quantum technologies and AI together. The first thing I like to tell people, I teach quantum computation, so I understand the theory of it. And I would just say, as more and more announcements are made in the market by these vendors, just be careful to interpret what it is that's being said in those announcements. There's a lot of times that I see words like quantum advantage and quantum supremacy being thrown around. And it's not that these aren't really, really significant technical breakthroughs, very noteworthy stuff that's happening. They're tremendous developments. I would just say, just understand that sometimes those things come with a caveat. Right? We're still in that noisy intermediate scale computing era. So if a company says, I have 50 qubits, and another company says, I have 100, it's tempting to think, well, the company with 100 qubits must perform twice as well as the company with only 50 qubits. But you have to keep in the back of your mind that qubits are noisy. In order to use one single qubit to compute a function, you have to protect it with a number of other qubits around it. So that machine that has 50 qubits if the ratio is 10 to 1, but the ratio on the 50 qubit machine is just 2 physical qubits for every logical qubit. It's possible that a machine with fewer qubits can actually outperform a machine with more qubits. So I don't want to undermine progress that's being made. I think it's extraordinary. Every time I read one of these new releases, I am very impressed. But just wanted to give you that thought as you approach the market or as you do your own research. Just be careful to form your own opinions. And then, so where do I see AI going in the future with QC? So right now, I would claim that AI is serving as a catalyst for the development of quantum technologies. And the use case that we talked about, the NV Center, I think reinforces that. We're at a different phase in history right now. You think back to where mechanical computers were invented and all the design work and all the unknowns that they had to deal with when trying to build those computers. Well, now it's a little different. People who are doing hardware design or designing quantum algorithms or designing quantum software libraries or quantum compilers, they have more tools at their disposal. They can actually use AI. You can use ChatGPT and say, hey, give me a design for a quantum chip. And then you can say, model this for me. What would happen if it were struck by lightning? Model the effects and give me a report on that, without having to actually go through and execute all those steps manually. So it's extremely time saving. I think all the AI tools that are available now are really helping to expedite the development of quantum technology. I think that'll only go on for so long. I do think that at some point, we're going to see that pattern become inverted. Eventually, I think quantum computers, and when they get to a fault tolerant level, and they are appropriately scaled to the right number of qubits, I think that's actually going to lean on the AI industry a little bit, kind of force AI engineers to think, well, I have this new tool, this reliable fault-tolerant quantum computer. What kind of new techniques can I use? What kind of new problems and data sets can I bring to that platform to try to solve? So I think it's going to be very interesting to see in the future if that happens. But my interpretation today is that AI is helping expedite the development of quantum. And then maybe in the 10 to 15 year range, I think we're going to see that paradigm shift where quantum computing becomes an accelerant for AI.
Thanks, Joe. This has been a fascinating conversation, and we have tons of Q&A that are coming in. So thank you. For all of those of you who have a question but haven't done so yet, please push the Q&A button and fill it in, and we'll try and get to as many of these as possible. First, I want to talk a little bit, Joe. I loved how you talked about AI for quantum and quantum with AI. Obviously, we've heard a lot about large language models. We've heard a lot about generative AI. And in the QEDC report, they talked about quantum being able to help optimize the modeling. And then you had mentioned also in your sensing where it was AI kind of came in the front, the middle, and the back end. How are you seeing kind of quantum computing and AI in the modeling perspective?
Yeah, great question. So it's interesting to me because it's like, quantum is not going to be a panacea for solving every AI challenge. We're probably going to take a hybrid model where classical computers are going to be good enough at solving a portion of the problem, but a portion of the problem is so difficult that we really need to elevate that up and have a quantum computer solve it. So where I see this from a modeling perspective, it's really believed, it's theorized at this point, that we're going to be able to train models much faster. So if you have, say, I don't know, 10 gigabytes of data and you want to train your model on it, that model needs to have seen all of that data. And that's pretty time consuming to train. And then it's even more time consuming to retrain, which is a best practice. But for certain types of data, what you can do is put it in a quantum superposition. And you can train a quantum model on all states at once. So that's a drastic speed up. In some cases, it's quadratic. In some cases, it's even as fast as exponential. But I think it's in the training and the retraining of those models where you're going to see the biggest payoff.
Fantastic. You mentioned NV centers, and there's a question here about, do you know of the companies that are working on NV now? And is Leidos looking at NV centers and quantum sensors in conjunction with research organizations?
Great question. So yes, there are companies out there who do it. The academic institution who comes to mind, definitely University of Maryland here locally in our area is the academic center that focuses on that. There's a company, I believe they're based in Australia, focuses on NV Center tech, both as a sensor, but also as a compute platform, so, which is kind of interesting. And that's called Quantum Brilliance. And yes, Leidos has done some work. We have done some work in that area. I'll hold off on maybe as answering the last part of that,
Yep.
just because I am a Leidos affiliate. But I would say maybe a quick Google may give you the answers that you're seeking.
Understandable. There is a question here. Obviously, whenever we talk about computing and we talk about AI, encryption always comes up. So there is a few questions in the chat, so I'm going to kind of combine a few of them together. Kind of as folks are looking at AI for potentially cracking encryption, as well as looking at a quantum computer that maybe once large enough, fault tolerant, will be able to do it. Do you see kind of the emergence of these two technologies coming together as expediting that process of potentially harming our current encryption standards and therefore needing PQC efforts to move faster?
Oh, interesting question. So I think the answer to that in my mind is yes. Right? In 1994, Shor's algorithm proved that we can solve the integer factorization using quantum discrete Fourier transform. We can do it much faster by estimating the periodicity of the encryption function. And then we can basically throw out like 90% of the candidate keys, and that gives us a very small key space that we need to search. So provably there's a speed up there, but we're kind of waiting on the compute to catch up so that we can actually do this at the scale of crypto systems that are actually interesting that we might wish to break. My fear is that, yes, I think AI is here and now, and it has accelerated techniques that it can use. I haven't explored this space myself, but I do have some concerns that AI can maybe bridge that gap. So while we're waiting on the quantum hardware, there are things that AI can do to accelerate the computation needed to do just that. I was at an event a couple weeks ago, Whitfield Diffie. So he's the Diffie of the Diffie-Hellman Key Exchange. He mentioned that he was frightened about, I think he said, armies of cyberbots breaking cryptography, right? And so if the gentleman who created the cryptographic primitive to exchange keys is frightened, I think I share in that sentiment. So absolutely, yes, I think it can be a catalyst while we wait for the hardware advances on the quantum side to catch up.
Perfect. Veering a little bit away from quantum and AI, but leaning in on your being a lecturer at Johns Hopkins, we do have a question from one of the participants. They have a BS in statistics, but they're wondering about how to kind of engage in quantum industry as a quantum engineer, looking at the workforce and looking at the talent needed, obviously, for AI and quantum, both sensing and compute. What are your thoughts for kind of areas of focus for the workforce? And is it really the old adage of you must be a theoretical physicist in order to enter this field? Or is it opening up to other types of disciplines?
That's a fantastic question. I'm actually very encouraged to hear that. So my background is computer science, and I did cybersecurity as well for my master's degree. So I'm not a physicist. In fact, as an undergraduate, I was a little intimidated by the physics and the math. They beat me up pretty good. But I kind of went back at it in grad school, and I said, okay, this isn't so bad. But what I'd say is there's kind of a continuum of positions that are going to be necessary to leverage quantum technology properly. Right? We need the people doing the low-level hard work of engineering, design, fabrication. Right? There is a dedicated group that needs to be doing the theory, and it needs to be doing the low-level design and the microarchitecture all the way up through the higher-level software development libraries. But you can jump in safely. I think the route that all the tech providers are trying to take is kind of abstract away all of the quantum. That's what I keep hearing. We don't want it to be apparent that you're using a quantum computer. We want you to develop software at a high level like Python, so it feels just like Python, like you've always used it, and then not have to think about the lower level details. And I speculate we have quite a bit of software developers in the industry today. I kind of wonder, will we ever even see a quantum software developer? Or will it be AI that empowers the developers to figure out which problems are right for quantum computers and how to compile those solutions. That's maybe a more distant goal, but definitely there are opportunities for people who might be more statistics oriented, which is more quantum than you think. It's actually very quantum, but to jump in at any level of the tech stack where you feel comfortable.
Well, thank you so much. We are at time today. This has been a fascinating discussion. Really do appreciate your time, Joe. We appreciate everybody attending this event. And if you'd like to hear more, please reach out to ATARC to learn more about the Global Quantum Working Group. Thank you so much and have a great day.
All right. Thank you. Take care.